On our newscast tonight, 20 million people affected by arguably the biggest data leak in the country's history are asking the firms that were responsible for safeguarding their information for answers. The spotlight is now on Korea's financial regulators as they vow to take action to prevent further damage. The number of confirmed avian influenza cases rises again in the country, raising fears the virus may have spread nationwide. The outbreak is already taking a bite out of the sales of poultry products. Although North Korea seems eager to extend an olive branch, South Korea's unification minister is less than enthused based on Pyongyang's track record of broken promises and illogical preconditions. Stay with us for these stories and more.
It is 11 a.m. in Tripoli, 2:30 p.m. in New Delhi, and 6 on a Tuesday evening here in Seoul. I'm Kim Hyun-ji.
Thank you for joining us for an early edition at 6. I'm Daniel Che. We begin with, of course, the latest on the bird flu outbreak here in Korea. More than 200,000 chickens and ducks around infected areas in the southwest of the country have been slaughtered.
And the number of confirmed cases is growing, raising fears that the virus may have already spread nationwide. Our Kwon Soa has the latest.
Fears of a nationwide bird flu outbreak in Korea are growing. Disease prevention authorities said Tuesday that they suspect a duck farm in the southern city of Jeongeup in Jeollabuk-do Province has been infected with avian influenza. If their suspicions prove true, it would be the first case of AI outside of Gochang and Buan counties, the source of the recent AI outbreaks, and would mean that the risk of birds carrying the virus to other places has increased. With that in mind, the Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs announced Tuesday that all ducks within a 3-kilometer radius of the infected farms will be culled. That's a much wider area than the 500-meter radius set earlier, but for now, the order excludes chicken. Earlier in the day, authorities confirmed that the number of poultry farms in Buan and Gochang that have ducks infected with the highly pathogenic H5N8 strain of avian influenza has risen to 4. The same strain of the virus was confirmed in a group of wild ducks found dead in a reservoir near a poultry farm in Gochang on Monday. Officials say this, as well as several more suspicious cases, including a recent one on Jeju Island, increases the chance that migratory ducks are the source of the bird flu outbreak. More specifically, they are pointing to a type of duck called the Baikal teal, which fly in from Russia to Korea for the winter. Korea has a total of 37 wintering sites for migratory birds. The Ministry of Environment has said it will track the Baikal teal's route via GPS to calculate the possibility of a further virus spread. Meanwhile, sales of poultry products have dropped significantly over the last couple of days, which is raising concerns in the distribution industry ahead of the Lunar New Year holiday. Health authorities say, however, that there is a very slim chance that the infected products have or will enter the market, and even if they do, the virus is destroyed once cooked at 75 degrees Celsius for at least 5 minutes. Kwon Soa, Arirang News.
Korea's financial institutions have been rattled by one of the biggest information leaks in the country's history, and the firms in question are struggling to placate thousands of furious customers. The country's financial regulators have vowed to take appropriate punitive action and to prevent further damage. Our Ji Myung-gil reports.
Thousands of angry customers swarmed into their banks for a second straight day on Tuesday to get their credit card details changed and to file complaints about the credit card firm's mismanagement of their personal information. Their actions follow in the wake of what has become one of the biggest information leaks in the nation's history, with up to 20 million people in Korea having been affected.
I've been waiting here for more than an hour and I'm dumbfounded by the whole situation. Financial institutions are responsible for protecting our assets and personal information, not leaking it. They should compensate for any damages that customers may incur.
Concerns arising that customers' information may have fallen into the hands of scammers, with reports emerging that suspicious and unintended financial transactions have been made on accounts. The leak is one of the worst in the country's history, with the personal data, bank account details, addresses, and credit ratings of millions of people now out in the open. The three card firms KB국민카드, NH농협카드, and 롯데카드 said they will fully cover any financial losses suffered by their customers from scams linked to the data leak. On Wednesday, the government will announce a set of preventive measures to stop similar data leaks from occurring, as well as toughened penalties for those involved in leaking data. These are expected to include stronger monitoring of staff at financial companies involved in customer data management, tougher regulations to prevent financial firms from sharing client data with their affiliates, and stronger punitive measures on financial institutions and their executives in case of data leaks. This information leak comes less than 1 month after the personal data of some 130,000 Standard Chartered Bank Korea and Citibank Korea customers was stolen. Jeongeup, Arirang News.
Staying on the topic, the number of bogus websites of financial institutions with malignant codes that dupe people into revealing their bank or credit card information has risen 79-fold in just 2 years. The Korea Internet and Security Agency says the total of such websites in the January to November period last year was over 5,800. This in stark contrast to just 74 in 2011. Last year's figure is also up nearly 40% from a year earlier. The numbers come as a surprise at a time when a massive personal data leak of at least 20 million credit card holders is raising concerns that the leaked information could be used by a ring of financial scammers. Korea is not alone when it comes to suffering from personal data leaks. Over in the U.S., similar data theft incidents have emerged to add to consumer concerns. The department store Neiman Marcus reported last week it was the victim of a cyber attack. The company said its computer network was hacked last July but went undetected until December, but it did not disclose the exact amount stolen. Meanwhile, an investigation is underway into one of the biggest data breaches in history at the retailer Target during the holiday shopping season last year. The number of customers whose personal data, including mailing addresses and phone numbers, as well as credit and debit card information, was stolen, is reported to have hit 110 million.
Turning now to President Park Geun-hye's state visit to Switzerland. The Korean leader and her Swiss counterpart have pledged to work together to realize a so-called creative economy through technological cooperation and by fostering specialized personnel. Our presidential correspondent Oh Jin-ju, who is traveling with the president, sends us this report.
Cooperation in the sectors of industrial technology and education dominated summit talks Monday between President Park and President of the Swiss Confederation, Didier Burkhalter. The two leaders recognized the need to couple Switzerland's top-notch technology in precision machinery, chemical, nano, and bio industries with Korea's advanced manufacturing skills, a crucial point of cooperation in realizing the so-called creative economy.
스위스는 세계적인 기초과학 강국이고 또 한국은 IT와 응용 기술이 발달한 나라라서 양국의 협력이 서로에게 큰 도움이 될 거라고 생각합니다.
Out of the 11 MOUs and one agreement that were signed during the president's state visit, 3 were on technology cooperation. President Park also sought ways to harness the strengths of Korean and Swiss education to foster specialized personnel that can work well within the creative economy. Switzerland is well known for its educational system, which is based heavily on apprenticeship. Most high school students are trained in vocational schools called Berufsschule, where they spend 3 to 4 days a week in companies to gain experience in industrial settings. An MOU was signed between the two nations to provide opportunities for graduates of Korea's vocational high schools or Meister schools employed in Swiss companies operating in Korea to receive vocational training in Switzerland for a year. There are also a number of MOUs signed to boost trade and investment, including a social security agreement that would relieve Korean and Swiss employees working in each other's countries from double taxation. It wasn't just the economic topics that topped the summit agenda. The Swiss leader promised to throw full support behind Seoul's efforts to maintain stability on the Korean peninsula and persuade North Korea to denuclearize. Oh Jin-ju, Arirang News, Bern.
The Korean trade official who was kidnapped in the Libyan capital of Tripoli on Sunday is safe, according to an official from Korea's foreign ministry, though it did not specify how the information was obtained. The official said the government is preparing for anything, but cannot say whether the act was politically motivated. Han So-gu, the head of the local branch of the state-run Korea Trade Investment Promotion Agency, was abducted by 4 armed men on his way home from work on Sunday evening local time. The identity of Han's abductors is not yet known, but there is speculation that Al-Qaeda may be involved.
Digging deeper, getting to the bottom of stories that impact your life. Talking with you on air and online. Connecting you with heroes and experts to help you understand the world's most pressing issues. News and current affairs at its best, with Moon Gun-young and Daniel Che on Early Edition at 6.
Now shifting gears to the economy, Korean import prices rose by 2 points. Independent lawmaker Ahn Cheol-soo now says his new political party will launch in March, in time for the upcoming local elections in June. Speaking at a press conference on Tuesday, Yoon Yeo-jun, co-chair of Ahn's new politics committee, said a preparatory body to oversee the party's formation will be established sometime next month. This means the June 4th local elections are lining up to be a 3-way competition between the ruling and main opposition parties and Ahn's new party. Venture investments reached a record high last year on the back of the Park Geun-hye administration's drive to create a more efficient framework for startups. Investments in ventures reached 1.8 trillion won, or roughly $1.3 billion in 2013, according to the Small and Medium Business Administration and the Korean Venture Capital Association. That is the highest level since 2001 and is up by 99% compared to 2012.
U.S. Deputy Secretary of State William Burns, who is on a 3-nation Asia tour this week, says North Korea's recent peace offensive is a cause for concern that could be an early indicator of provocations to come. Our Hwang Sung-hee reports.
North Korea has seemingly been on a peace offensive in the new year, but visiting U.S. Deputy Secretary of State William Burns says the regime's tendency to have a sudden change of heart worries Washington.
Well, I think the United States and our friends here in the Republic of Korea share a lot of concern about the recent behavior of the DPRK leadership and the dangers of further reckless behavior and provocation in the future, as I said.
There was a dramatic change in Pyongyang's attitude towards Seoul after North Korean leader Kim Jong-un's once powerful uncle, Chang Sung-taek, was executed late last year. Following its proposal last week to end all cross-border slandering, Pyongyang has persistently expressed a strong will to improve inter-Korean ties. South Korea scoffed at the offer, with President Park Geun-hye telling the government to remain vigilant as the North engages in its propaganda offensive. After a meeting with South Korea's first Vice Foreign Minister Kim Gyu-hyun in Seoul on Tuesday, Burns reaffirmed Washington's commitment to its ally.
I expressed once again the strong American support for President Park's principled approach to the DPRK and stressed once again the strong American support for the defense and security of the Republic of Korea.
The U.S. diplomat is expected to discuss the current state of North Korea with officials in China before moving on to Japan, where the country's denials of historical wrongdoings will be taken up. Once Burns wraps up his trip, U.S. Assistant Secretary for the Bureau of East Asian and Pacific Affairs Daniel Russell, who will accompany Burns in China and Japan, will visit Seoul on Sunday to share the results of the discussions in Beijing and Tokyo. Hwang Sung-hee, Arirang News.
Maintaining our focus on North Korea, South Korea's unification minister Yoo Gil-jae has outright dismissed Pyongyang's proposal to end all cross-border hostilities and provocations, saying the offer does not make logical sense. Speaking at a reunification-related forum on Tuesday, Yoo said North Korea made the proposal last week, knowing full well that South Korea could not accept it.
The minister's comments echo those made by the government on Saturday. Ryu also called on the need to resume reunions of families separated during the Korean War, noting that Pyongyang had unilaterally called off a fresh round of them at the last minute in September. After days of will they or won't they, the main opposition group in Syria, the Syrian National Coalition, has confirmed it will attend peace talks in Switzerland on Wednesday.
This comes after the UN withdrew its controversial invitation for Iran to attend. Our Park Ji-won has this story.
UN Secretary-General Ban Ki-moon withdrew his invitation for Iran to attend the much-anticipated peace talks on Syria, set to begin in Switzerland this week, after Iran refused to accept a 2012 Geneva deal calling for a transitional government for Syria.
The Secretary-General is deeply disappointed by Iranian public statements today that are not at all consistent with that stated commitment. Given that it has chosen to remain outside that basic understanding, he has decided that the one-day Montreux gathering will proceed without Iran's participation.
The UN's controversial last-minute decision to invite Iran had threatened to jeopardize the talks before they had even started, as Syria's main opposition group, the Syrian National Coalition, said it would not participate in the talks unless Iran, one of the Assad regime's major backers, was disinvited, and Tehran stopped exerting a military influence over Syria. After the UN withdrew Iran's invitation, the Syrian National Coalition confirmed its participation at the peace talks.
The National Coalition welcomes the decision of the Secretary-General of the United Nations, Mr. Ban Ki-moon, in withdrawing the invitation that was sent to Iran. The National Coalition also would like to confirm its attendance to Geneva II conference and its participation in it.
The peace talks, involving some 30 countries, are scheduled to begin Wednesday in Montreux, Switzerland. On Friday, talks between the Syrian government and opposition delegations will continue in Geneva. More than 100,000 people have been killed and millions more displaced since the Syrian conflict broke out some 3 years ago. Park Ji-won, Arirang News.
Well, it's been 3 years since the Arab Spring began in the Middle East, which was first sparked when the people of Tunisia demanded President Ben Ali step down and succeeded in removing him from power in January 2011. And 3 years later, the Middle East and North Africa are still very much unstable.
Unfortunately so. For an in-depth look at the aftermath of the democracy movement that was sparked in the Middle East, we are now joined by Dr. Chang Ji-hyang, Director of the Middle East and Africa Center at the Asan Institute for Policy Studies. Dr. Chang, thank you for coming. Congratulations on the latest bundle of joy, and thank you for making time even though you're on maternity leave at the moment.
Thanks for having me.
So 3 years ago, the people of Egypt brought an end to the 30-year dictatorial rule of President Hosni Mubarak by launching massive anti-government protests, right? And the protests were sparked by the Jasmine Revolution in Tunisia. But Egypt is once again under the rule of the military. So what is your assessment on that?
Yes, it's very unfortunate. And since President Morsi of the Muslim Brotherhood got ousted in a coup last year, the country has been severely polarized. Last week, Egypt approved a referendum on a new constitution, and the military-backed government and the army chief LCC will use the result as a source of their legitimacy. However, it was very highly controlled exercise, not really a real choice or consensus-based result.
Okay, sometimes the devil you know is better than the devil you don't know. Well, other parts of the region are also having some trouble in terms of democracy is concerned, especially. What is your assessment? Could this be the end of Arab Spring?
Probably, because Tunisia is the only successful case so far. On the 3rd anniversary of the Arab Spring, Tunisia is the only country celebrating the unprecedented and unpredictable civil revolutions which toppled a dictator Ben Ali. And Tunisians are about to approve a new constitution based on more compromises between Islamic parties and secular politicians, which is quite different from Egypt. And Egypt and Yemen are typical examples of regression back to authoritarianism. And Libya is not really showing a sign of authoritarian regression, but as we know, there are so many clashes and instability, like due to the clashes between government and many militias.
Right, so as you said, chaos and confusion remain in much of the region despite the movements for democracy. So what is the main reason for that? And is there any way to add momentum for this people's desire for democracy?
Well, actually, toppling dictatorship does not really necessarily guarantee a stable democracy or does not automatically lead to democratic transitions. Revolutions are quite abrupt and contingent phenomena. And revolutions are much easier to take place than post-revolution transition process. Like, for instance, the year 2011 witnessed many popular uprisings in many Arab countries, but only 4 countries among them succeeded in toppling dictators, and only 1 country out of the 4 exercises a smoother transition process right now, Tunisia.
Revolution is like flying an airplane. Taking off is relatively easy. Landing it is a hard part.
Yes,
well,
exactly.
Now, okay, thank you. Well, now turning to the Syria situation, there is the ongoing, clash between opposition forces and President Bashar al-Assad's forces, and we even hear international terrorists joining in to reinforce certain parts or certain sites they support. How do you foresee the Syrian crisis unfolding in the near future?
I don't expect a bright future in Syria's, conflict resolution, despite the, peace talks in Geneva right now. Most of all, the 2 main goals dealing with Assad regime and Islamic jihadists are not shared among actors. Unlike international anti-Assad coalition member countries, Assad backers such as Russia, Iran, and China continue to see Assad in power. And even among anti-Assad coalition member countries such as Turkey, Qatar, Saudi, EU, and the United States, there's no really strong agreement. For instance, Saudi and other Sunni GCC countries do not take a strong and tough stance against Islamic jihadists. So maybe international community need to reach a very short-term based and minimalist agreement, such as nothing but Assad scenario.
Right. Well, another country that we would like you to comment on is Iran. So we hear the reports that the UN and EU began to lift sanctions against Iran as Iran kind of followed through on their agreement to dissolve most of its sensitive nuclear operations. So do you think this process will continue and this agreement, Geneva peace deal, will be kept by all parties?
I will say up to a point. The interim nuclear deal was a really significant first step toward comprehensive agreement, and the newly elected reformist President Hassan Rouhani adopted quite flexible and pragmatic strategy at the negotiation table, particularly on lifting sanctions. But again, the deal is quite limited and temporary. Focusing on just diluting the current Iran's nuclear program, the United States was able to get the initial deal. And also in Iran, presidents do not have much, strong power regarding foreign policy making. So the final decisions only can be made by Khamenei, the supreme leader.
Right, a follow-up is always important, and of course, important to talk to the who's in the organization or the country. We hope they are listening to your words of advice right now. Dr. Chang Jiang, thank you so much for coming. This was Dr. Chang Jiang, Research Fellow and Director of the Middle East and Africa Center at Asan Institute for Policy Studies. Do rest well, and we hope to see you back here soon.
Thank you.
Well, let's go over to our Kim Bo-kyung at the Weather Center for a checkup. Bo-kyung, although we didn't have any snow here in Seoul today, I understand it's a different story for other regions.
That's right, Yeonji. Heavy snowfall advisories have been issued in the Gangwon-do and Jeollabuk-do provinces, as well as the mountains of Jeju.
And it's important to note that the snow falling in most places are not very clean because of the fine dust in the atmosphere.
That's right. Snow isn't as clean as it looks because of pollutants, that is. And a pre-fine dust watch was issued in Seoul as of 2 p.m. and numbers say that Seoul is seeing about 150 micrograms per cubic meter of fine dust, which is about 3 times the normal levels. As for snow, about 30 centimeters of snow piled up on the mountains of Gangwon, and another 20 centimeters will fall through later tonight. Taking a look at tomorrow's readings, Seoul starts off the day at -9 degrees with a high of 2. Meanwhile, Daegu and Busan reach 5 and 6 degrees respectively. Moving on to other regions, Jeju makes it to 6 degrees and Dokdo and Mount Kumgang peak at 3 and -4 degrees respectively. Well, that's all I have for you this hour, and back to you guys.
Well, thank you for that, Bo-kyung, and that wraps up the news for this hour. Thank you for watching. This has been Daniel Che.
And I'm Kim Yeon-ji. Thank you for watching. More news updates coming up at 8 p.m. Korea time.